Good evening. I declare the Ordinary Council meeting open at 18:04 p.m. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We would like to pay respect to the elders of the Noongar Nation, past and present, who have walked and cared for the land, and we acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions made to the life of this city and this region, and I invite you to bow your head in prayer. Lord, we thank you for blessing our city, our community and our council. Guide us all in our decision-making to act fairly, without fear or favour, and with compassion, integrity, wisdom and honesty. May we show true leadership, be inclusive of all and guide all of the city's people and many families to a prosperous future that all may share. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Please note that the audio proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. That broadcast will remain available via the City of Wanneroo website following the conclusion of the meeting. Item 1, attendances. We have Councillor Berry on a current leave of absence until the 30th of June 23 inclusive. And we have a new request for leave of absence by Councillor Baker. I'd like a mover for that item, please. Deputy Mayor Treby, and a seconder, Councillor Wright.
Madam Mayor, do you require the specifics of the request for leave of absence?
You've just asked for a leave of absence. That's
yes.
all we need to know.
Well, the date is for the Ordinary Council meeting scheduled
the
for
18th of July 23.
Yes, that's the
yes, that's correct.
You.
Yes. Okay. We would like to cast a vote on that. Can we cast a vote on that item, please? Thank you. Cast your vote, councillors. And there... I'm trying to press yes. I think I pressed yes. No, there's only 13. It's not receiving my tick. Well, we'll vote again, please, and hopefully it'll work this time.
Perfect. Yep, that's good.
Yes, 14 carried. Carried unanimously, Councillor Baker. Okay, we now go to public question and statement time. The following general rules apply to public question and statement time. Public questions and statements should only relate. Councillor Nguyen, could you please not talk while the presiding member or any other member of council is talking, please? Thank you. The following general rules apply to public question and statement time. Public questions and statements should only relate to the business of the local government and should not be a personal statement or opinion. Only questions relating to matters affecting the local government will be considered at a council meeting, and only questions that relate to the purpose of the meeting will be considered at a special council meeting. Questions may be taken on notice and responded to after the meeting. Questions may not be directed at specific council members or a city employee. Questions are not to be framed in such a way as to reflect adversely on a particular council member or city employee. First priority will be given to persons who are asking questions relating to items on the current council meeting agenda, and second priority will be given to public statements. Only public statements regarding items on the council agenda under consideration will be heard. Each person seeking to ask questions or make a statement may address the council for a maximum of 3 minutes each. So we've had some questions received prior to the meeting, and that is from Mr S Healy from Darsh about the former Quinns Rock Caravan Park site, and they have been responded to in writing, and everyone has access to that. And from Mr C Treverson from Clarkson about public bollards, and that has been responded to in writing as well. Do we have any other questions from the gallery? Public gallery. Yes, Tracy Klawomski. You have got a question?
No, not at this point.
Okay. And Mrs Newton, do you have a question?
Good evening, Mayor Aitken and councillors. First, may I say I don't like this setup. Had I arrived in a wheelchair today, I would not have been able to come around here and go up to the podium, so please take that into account in the future. Thank you. As it happens, I could walk today, but I won't be climbing up that step again. I have two questions mainly. The first one is in CP03. I guess you're expecting this one. This is on the petition for election signs. I listened to the briefing last week, and I heard you were told that some signs are removed because they are regarded as a safety hazard. Well, that's not part of the local law for the signs. The local law says you can't put them there in the first place. Not that you shouldn't put them there in a safe place. So my questions are, is council aware that the current advertised local law is quite specific about not putting signs in public places? This, along with the information about becoming an elected member, is still on council's website. Am I to take it from this report that council is going to ignore that local law in the 2023 elections?
Thank you, Mrs Newton. Ms Terralink, would you like to respond to that, please?
Thank you, Mayor. As indicated at the briefing session last week, the intention is to for the existing local law to remain in place, and the CEO will be considering compliance with the local law in the lead up to the next round of elections.
Mrs Newton, do you have another question?
I'd just like to add a bit to the little petition that came in. Unfortunately, we weren't able to table the full petition. The ones that were left out in the public arena for signatures had so many offensive remarks written across them about mayoral candidates that I shredded them. So only the hand-taken around petition where we could actually watch someone signing it was actually tabled. Otherwise, there have been a lot more signatures to council. People felt really strongly about the mayoral signs that went out last year. It appeared that if one person put a sign out, the other person had to put one next to it, and so on and so on, and then they doubled and then they trebled. And they're against our own local law that as elected members, we, when I was an elected member, were told to adhere to, not only during the year, but at election time. It's made quite clear by the officer from the Electoral Commission. She also reiterates that to all candidates. So our councillors chose to ignore that local law, and this petition is to say, please don't ignore it this year. Don't wait till 2024. If people put signs out this year, we expect them to be taken in. If not, I will hire a man with a van. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs Newton. Have you got another question?
The actual irony of this, and this is personal opinion, the irony of all this is that 8 people on council could be standing for election in one form or another in October, and you're making a decision on this. So that's really odd. I guess that the community will make of it what happens tonight. My other question is on CSO2. It's about the decisions that were taken at the annual general meeting. Two of my motions were fine. One, the green waste one, I was really happy with the way that was written, and I hope that council does do something about stopping people cutting down whole trees and we take them away at council residents' costs. But the one where where I had asked, and it was seconded, about the going to conferences and submitting a report, when I read the report that you're all going to vote on tonight, I was absolutely blown away by the fact that it contains all this stuff about the question I asked in December last year, which didn't relate to the motion that we, the electors, voted on that night. And my seconder had absolutely no idea of the question that I asked in December. So my question is, why is most of that report about the question I asked in December, which I still haven't received a response to, I have to add?
Thank you, Mrs Newton. Ms Jennings, would you be able to respond to that question?
Thank you, Mayor. The question that was raised in December, and as well as the motion, were both about elected members attending conferences. So whilst they weren't exactly the same, and I understand that position, the information that we're trying to improve on will actually help us answer both the questions. So hence, that's why we had them lined up. In the process of looking through this, we have actually now started improving some of that collection of information so that we can answer your original question in December. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Jennings.
I raised that question purely and simply as an elected member those years and elected members around the chamber. I'm sure that you tell your residents that every cent that council spends is in that warrant of payments, and they can find it. Well, I can tell you, to find some things is obviously almost impossible, including for the staff. I'm pleased that the recommendation says that a report is going to be published. I will certainly read it and circulate it when it is published. And my other comment I'd like to make tonight is I'm really pleased to see that at last this council is putting a motion up to ALGA, and I think it's a really good motion, and I hope that the attendees support it 100%. I think you might not get all the support because we're a big council and we're trying to get more money, and the little councils might not support you, but I hope that they do. But it's really good to see that there's a motion going, and there's a reason for several elected members to actually attend that conference and vote on those motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Newton, and thank you for your support. Are there any other questions from any members of the gallery this evening? Okay. We move on to confirmation of minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 21st of February. And can I have a mover for that, please? Yes, Councillor Baker, seconder Councillor Civic. I don't think there's any need to speak about it. I'll just put it straight to the vote if there's no one to speak against. And that was passed unanimously. Okay, for the minutes of the special council meeting, SCO2 323, can I have a mover for that? Deputy Mayor Treby, seconder Councillor Baker, and can we cast our vote for this too now? Thank you. And that was passed unanimously. Item 5, Mayor announcements by the Mayor without discussion. I am pleased to share the City of Wanneroo was recognised at the 2023 Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia Awards for Excellence this month. The Burns Beach to Mindari dual-use path was awarded Best Public Works Project $2 million to $5 million in the metropolitan area, and the Waste Sorted Talking My Language Toolkit received a commendation in the Excellence in Innovation Award Metro Area category. The multifaceted path project delivered was a joint project between the cities of Wanneroo and Joondalup and the West Australian Planning Commission and Tamala Park Regional Council. Thousands of pedestrians and cyclists have used the link since it opened last year, with many coming from outside the region to do so. It is an investment in the future of our cities, and I am very proud of the role our city played in this local success story. The Waste Sorted Talking My Language Toolkit was developed to overcome the difficulties experienced by culturally and linguistically diverse communities in understanding waste services information due to language and literacy barriers. More than 40% of the city's population were born overseas and 20% of residents speak a language other than English at home. So it is extremely important that we are able to make waste information accessible to these residents. Thank you to the City CEO Daniel Sims and Assets Director Harminder Singh, who support their teams to deliver programs that benefit our community. Fantastic outcomes like these could not be achieved without the collaboration and input of team members from across the organisation, and I would like to acknowledge and congratulate everyone who helped bring these fantastic initiatives to life for our community. And I have the awards here. Yep. Harminder. Are we going to get a photograph from someone? We're not. So this. Item 6, questions from council members. Do I have any questions from council members? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have a question on an item as I wasn't at council last week because I was shielding the council from possible COVID. But on page 7, it is a question I wish just to ask administration with regard to the Kingsway Little Athletics kiosk. And I'll talk about it later when it comes up. But I just wanted to ask administration, in the attachment on page 10, 11 and 12, it actually says option 1, option 2, but mainly lists option 1. My understanding obviously from that is we're actually approving, I guess, the funding to receive for option 1 only, not option 2.
Ms Terrelank.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, I believe it is option 1 that will be progressing.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Yep, my other question with it, I note on page 12 that we've decided to build the kiosk considerably higher than the current ball or clubhouse down there. Bearing in mind that we're not getting all the funding for this from the, or the funding we're asking for from the CSRF, is having that roof span so high an expense that we can maybe trim back a bit to meet the funding shortfall?
Ms Terrelank.
Through you, Mayor, we can consider the design. I don't think it will go to the extent of covering all of the funding that we didn't receive, but we can certainly have a look at the design and see if there are some value engineering options that we can consider.
Thank you, Ms Terrelank. Do we have any other questions, councillors? Yes, Councillor Sangali.
I have a question on Halesworth Park. Would you like me to wait until the item comes up or do it now?
Probably when the item comes up. Thanks, Councillor Sangali. And on that note, we move to petitions. There are 3 petitions to receive tonight. And petition PT 01323 to add a bus route to service Green Lifestyle Village, Lakelands Lifestyle Village, from Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I've received a petition with 173 signatures and 5 unverified signatures. I'll read the cover letter that was attached with that. The owners and residents of the Green Lifestyle Village, Lakelands Lifestyle Village and the residential properties surrounding Lakeland Drives have joined together to petition the City of Wanneroo for the provision of a bus service to connect our isolated community members with essential health, wellbeing and necessity of life service and good providers. Please find the attached petition with over 170 signatures in support of our request for a regular bus service. Within our respective lifestyle villages. Over 200 residents currently reside, and a number are forecasted to increase significantly to over 500 within the next 3 years. Whilst the demographic is primarily that of active retirees, we both have ageing residents, some of whom have or are approaching the time in their life when holding a motor vehicle licence is not viable or safe. The inability of these residents to drive significantly impacts on their quality of life and their capacity to self-manage. It is not the situation that people should find themselves in this city at this stage in their life. We, the ratepayers, urge the City of Wanneroo to consider all options and do all things necessary to promote the introduction of a regular bus service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Herridge, you have a petition to submit as well?
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I do. I've got a petition here for a total of 4 signatures from residents in regards to removal of trees between 9 and 11 Milstead Way in Marangaroo.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowe, you have a petition as well?
I do, thank you, Mayor. I have a petition signed by 19 people. For the benefit of those residents, I will read out what they have written. It is a request to consider the closure of a public access way between Inez Place and Blackmore Avenue in Girraween, and they've outlined a number of reasons for that. The first is that the PAW is a hotspot for antisocial behaviour, including the setting of fires, drug use and the dangerous use of e-ridables and motorbikes. The second is that the PAW used to serve to enhance access to Blackmore Primary School. However, that school is no longer in operation. The third is that residents can access the bus network and shopping centre via 2 alternative routes, one being through Templeton Crescent and the other being through Blackmore Park itself. And the fourth reason is that it is used as an escape route for offenders when police or fire services have been called to attend to incidents in residencies in the vicinity. And the residents have expressed an interest in hoping that the matter can be dealt with at Council within 2 months of the petition being tabled. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Do I have a mover for the petitions? Yes, Councillor Savitna, seconded Deputy Mayor Treby. Can we please cast our vote for the petitions, please? And that was passed unanimously. Update on positions, UPO 1323 and UPO 2323. Those updates are provided in the agenda. Declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of interest, are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declaration of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. So, reports, item Infrastructure and Capital Works, ASO 10223. Do I have a mover? Councillor Parker. Do I have a seconder for this item? Construction of the main pavilion. Councillor Smith. Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this item?
Very briefly, I'm happy to support the delegation to the CEO. The development of the new sports amenities are badly needed as the Redwood Park facilities are bursting at the seams. Delegating the consideration of the tender to the CEO ensures a timely decision is made, the successful tenderer and council notified, and the long-awaited construction can begin. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Smith, would you like to speak to this item?
Just to second what Councillor Parker said. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this item?
Questions, Madam?
Okay, Councillor Sangali, could you please ask your question?
Well, the first one, I just wanted to point out a typo on page 4. When we considered previously the meeting, it was actually CP04, not 03. So that was just a typo on that one. But my actual question relates to the court pavilion, because when this tender was originally put out, it was for 2 pavilions, now it's only for 1. And I just want to know, what assurance do councillors and the general community have that the second court pavilion will proceed, because it's not also included in the master plan?
Mr Singh?
And through you, Mayor, I think that when Council made a decision, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, when considering the Halesworth Park total funding requirements, at that time decision was made to proceed with the main pavilion at this stage, and the second building will be, needs will be assessed and listed in the long-term financial plan.
Thank you. Councillor Sangalli, you have another question?
I guess I bring it up because it's not part of this recommendation for that to become part of the long financial plan considerations. So it's just dropping off as far as this reads.
Ms Terralink, do you have any details with the master plan and where it's the second pavilion's put? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly, as Mr Singh has indicated, the intention is to still pursue the provision of the second pavilion for the courts, noting that in the current construction market, unfortunately, there is not the funding available to do both at the same time. So the intention certainly is to keep that as part of the master plan and to include that in the long-term financial plan moving forward.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Councillor Sangalli.
My second question is around the design of the pavilions. Usually the design doesn't come back to us, and I'm just wanting to know the design that we approved back in February, is that the design that is going forward, or has there been some changes?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, my recollection is we haven't made any changes to the total floor layout, no changes to the design which was put out earlier. It is effectively the same tender for main pavilion which was put out earlier, has been re-advertised.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Is that all of your questions, Councillor Sangalli? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question to Ms Terralink, if I can. On page 3 of the agenda, under the heading detail, there's reference to the fact that the tender referred to included provisions for undertaking construction of the buildings on a separable, I think it meant severable, portion basis. And of course, there's 3 portions, SP1, SP2 and SP3. And also, just bearing that in mind, in paragraph 2 of the recommendation, it says that the CEO will be given the delegated authority to accept a tender. Is it possible that any tender that the CEO accepts may just be in relation to, for example, separable portion SP1, building A-main pavilion? In other words, can they be accepted on a piecemeal basis one by one, or do they have to be accepted collectively as a group? Thanks.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation actually includes a tender title as it was advertised. So when the evaluation is complete, we'll look at the separable portions A and B, and if they can both be afforded within the budget, then CEO can then exercise delegation to award the tender for portions which fall within the budget.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Baker, do you have another question?
Yes, further question. Under the heading financial implications on page 5, there's reference to the funding totalling 8.8 million being available and listed in project PR 2955 Halesworth Park Butler, and it states in the financial years 22, 23, etc., etc. Of course, there's only 4 months to run, or there's only 4 months left in the current financial year. What funding is allocated between now and the expiration of the current financial year, and how those funds be expended on the various separable portions, or will those funds be expended on other works required at the facility, please?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. When the budget is prepared, we look at the project cash flows and spread the funding over a number of financial years. That's why all these financial years have been listed. And when the budget comes to Council for adoption for 23-24, we'll have the amount listed in how much we will be able to expend on this project in 23-24 and any further requirements in the subsequent financial years.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any further questions on this item? Are there any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against, please cast your vote, councillors. We have 13 for and 1 against, and that was Councillor Sangalli. I declare it moved. We move on to item CP 01323, Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries Funding and Round Outcomes. Could I have a mover for this item? Councillor Miles, the seconder. Councillor Civic. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. I'm quite disappointed, actually, that the CSRF funding has actually dipped out our community of $80,000. And I guess whilst we got the full funding for the new sports lighting for Dalvik Park on this particular item, which was very good, the important use at Kingsway Little Athletics, which absolutely has hundreds, if not thousands, of young ones over the course of the morning and the day, where they do need to have the kiosk. And we only got $80,000 of the requested $162,000. And I think that for a state that is obviously seeking for us as a council to continue building this sort of infrastructure to help our mums and our dads and our families getting out and about, that $80,000 being short funded is wrong. And I know that we can't overturn this and we have to accept this grant to get the building at least started. I just think that there needs to be some sort of effort and correspondence back to the appropriate minister from this council to say that they need to improve their CSRF funding model to allow for these sort of projects to get fully funded so we don't have to keep going back to our community with either higher rates or postponing other projects which are much needed. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Civic, do you want to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Very briefly, I think Councillor Miles has covered all the most important aspects, but under number 3 of the recommendation, request the Mayor to write to the Minister. I think that's very, very important to make sure that we can bridge that gap and get the full funding for the building at Kingsway Sporting Complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Civic. Are there any speakers against this item? Councillor Wright, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Just reading recommendation 3, is it possible to also request for an explanation if why we don't get the full funding for the program? Is it possible to advocate to the Minister that for future applications that we actually get an explanation why we don't receive the full funding, if there are particular works that maybe wasn't done, or is that possible to include in that?
Ms Terrelink, what information do we get at the moment when we aren't successful for the total CRSS funding or not for particular items?
Thank you, Mayor. I believe we get the notification on what level of funding we've been successful for, and I guess the conversations with the department usually focus on the fact that the program is oversubscribed, and that's the reason why we only get partial funding in some instances for our projects.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink, and the CEO would like to speak to this as well.
Through you, Mayor. One option might be for the CEO to write to the Director General of the department asking for the master list of all projects that were submitted for funding under the program and what was allocated. That would at least provide a line of sight for the sector as to the amount that was available in the fund for the state and how it was distributed. We can extend that to ask for the rationale behind, but perhaps the starting point might be the master list.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Councillor Baker, do you have a question?
Yes, if I can. Thank you, Madam Mayor. To the CEO, please. Just in terms of the last question and answer, this program has always been oversubscribed, and of course that continues to be the single line sentence explanation when applications bomb out or are only partially funded. There must be a set of discretionary criteria, surely, that have to be referenced when funding applications are assessed by the assessment body. Do we know whether or not those or the set of discretionary criteria or the guidelines are actually published? Are they published, or is it confidential information?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Terrelink, do you have a response to that question?
Through you, Mayor, certainly when applying for the CSRFF funding, there is eligibility criteria that is provided. However, we're not privy to the assessment criteria, but it does give some indication as to which projects may be eligible for funding and which projects may not be eligible for funding. But generally, the reason, unless there is a specific project, we have had projects in the past where we've been given particular information that we may want to consider if we're going to resubmit an application. But generally, and with the Kingsway Little Athletics kiosk, we actually did try for funding in the previous round and weren't successful at all. This round we did get partial funding, so that suggests that while it's a valuable project, the only explanation that we have is that the program is oversubscribed, and that was the only funding that was available.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one more question through the chair to Ms Terrelink. Is there a drawdown date for the grant component of the funding? Is there a drawdown date such as 30 June
Ms Terrelink?
next year?
Through you, Mayor, yes, there will be a date by which the funding has to be expended, and that's normally specified in the funding agreement.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any more questions on this item? Councillor Miles?
Just a quick one. Does the CEO, Mayor, wish to modify this, or is he happy to take his suggestion of contacting the CEO or the Director General, in this case, direct?
Mr CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. Based on the instruction that I will be writing to the Director General, I think that's fine for me to action without a resolution.
Thank you. Are there any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against the item, voting is now open. Please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. I move to item CPO 20323, Rotary Park Play Space Upgrade and Consultation Outcomes, moved by Councillor Civic, seconded Councillor Wright. Councillor Civic, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Briefly, the Rotary Park Play Space has been within the city for many, many years now, and it is a very desired location for children and disabled children to come and enjoy the park with their parents and have a picnic or two, etc. Now, because time has gone by and it is now time to relook at this particular play space and improve it. 11 hectares of passive regional recreation, very, very important in the context of young children, and I'm pleased that the city now is looking at upgrading all of the facilities. I do note that there was many questions presented to the council and answered by administration quite well. I'm encouraging council to support this. It's very, very important in the context of Wanneroo and young children from far and wide. So, yes, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Civic. And Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to say that the project is really, really good. I know a lot of effort and time has gone into this project. I do want to highlight the community consultation period that we only received 7 responses, and I know this project went out 2 or 3 times to the community, and I do question that, are we over consulting to the point where we're not getting enough feedback for these projects, and we could actually use the budget to actually expand on the existing projects and expand and have more playground equipment, for example. However, what is in the report is fantastic. It's really good to see that the park will be fully fenced in. I know that a lot of parents visit, and that is probably one of the biggest concerns they have when going to that park, considering that it does span quite wide in length and width. So it will be good that parents can have that reassurance, but also to remind parents that not just to rely on this fencing, but to always watch their children at all times. However, administration has taken the time to make sure that this park keeps with its original theme and also the upkeep and maintenance, as I know that this is a well-utilised area in the Central Ward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Do I have any speakers against this item? If I have no speakers against this item, councillors, I asked you to cast your vote. Councillor Nguyen, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just in relation to the budget, is that based on the current cost estimates, or is that based on the potential cost reduction in the next few years?
Ms Terrelling?
Through you, Mayor, I understand it's based on the current concept design and cost estimates.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Yes, Councillor Nguyen.
And do you expect the cost pressure to change?
Ms Terrelink?
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to predict the market. We will just have to see what happens with the market over the coming years in terms of supply and demand.
I don't think you have a crystal ball, do you, Ms Terrelink? Okay, any more questions on this item? If not, and no speakers against, I ask councillors to cast their vote, please. And that was passed unanimously. I move to item CPO 323, petition of the election signs on the road verges. Councillor Baker, do you want to move this item?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Miles? Councillor Baker, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I support the recommendations referred to in the report and also the gist, thrust and purport of the content of the petition. It stands to reason that election signage, of course, relates to all types of election signage. There are various types, of course. There are the standard call flutes on stakes, be they garden stakes or star pickets, banners or call flutes on trailers that have been detached from vehicles, or banners and call flutes on trailers that have been towed by vehicles and parked up with the vehicles still attached, sandwich board signs, literally worn by campaigners or actual candidates. And also there are also signs which are held and waved manually to passing traffic, particularly at the intersection of Hester Avenue and the Mitchell Freeway. Often the problem with these sorts of laws is that it's very difficult to prove that the candidate himself or herself placed the sign or caused the sign to be placed. This is always the difficult position that the city has to deal with. The other thing too is under the city's enforcement policy, the city has a discretion whether or not in any given case to prosecute, to jump into a prosecution or infringement notice straight up, rather than sending out a warning letter and stipulating a time period for compliance to be achieved. The obvious way to deal with this particular difficulty of proof is to, in the review of the signs, to consider whether or not it would be permissible to reverse the onus of proof and require the candidate to prove on the balance of probabilities rather than at the criminal standard that the candidate had no knowledge of the placement of the sign and played no role in its placement. So the difficulty is proving, if you like, the elements of the relevant offence under local laws. That's something that the review will perhaps consider. I don't know, but I do foresee it probably would hit some hurdles when the local law is amended, gazetted, and then is sent to the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Delegated Legislation in the State Parliament. But yeah, common sense approach. There's a review coming up around this time next year. And so I agree with the petitioner's sentiments expressed in the wording within the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just continuing on from Councillor Baker's valid points. I think the other point too that the city and administration has articulated to councillors in the past that, and I did watch the briefing session last week online while I was isolating, and I think the questions that were being asked and answered by administration is correct. We are told every election that if signs are obviously in a dangerous, precarious situation, then they will be removed by Ranger Services, or you will get a phone call to say there's a sign at this location, you need to readdress it. I think the other issue too, which I have spoken about to our previous lawyer, Mr Yildiz, and I think when they reviewed what happened at Armidale, where they were absolutely, they were sued in the court, Supreme Court, and lost for trying to enforce constitutional rights, and it cost that council a lot of money to try and stop councillors and other candidates from promoting themselves or whatever party they belong to actually do an election. So I think we are in danger of being litigated against if we try to enforce something that is clearly by Supreme Court action, by Armidale standards, false, or we could lose, and then obviously we would be out of pocket many thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, if we have to challenge it. I think administration's view and strategic approach to it is valid. I think we all understand that as councillors. And I believe that whilst there are always going to be errant signs out there, I think from the public point of view, I think it was indicated by Mrs Newton earlier, it'll be up to that person to judge whether they want to vote for that person, bearing in mind they might be putting signs illegally out there on council verges. But with that in mind, I'm happy to see administration do the review and bring it back a bit later on in 24. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Do I have any questions about this item? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Yep, Madam Mayor, I'd actually like to move a procedural motion to move this item and refer it to the Audit and Risk Committee to review both the risk appetite setting on this particular item and also develop some tolerance levels to help guide administration in their deliberations.
Do you have a seconder for this procedural motion? Yes, Councillor Rowe. Councillor Rowe, would you like to speak to this? Okay, so therefore this is a procedural motion. Could I ask that the councillors cast their vote on this procedural motion whether to return this item to Audit and Risk Committee? So the procedural motion has been carried 12-2. Those against was Councillor Baker and Councillor Miles. So on that note, we will move to the next item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is Transactional Finance CSO 1323, the financial activity statement for the period ended... Sorry? Oh, I beg your pardon. I moved across the page too quickly. Next item is CP04, 5-year review of the local emergency management arrangements. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Miles, seconder? Councillor Baker. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think it's a very good report, and one of the points that I did want to point out while reading it on page 26, that there are comments from DEMA comments. I'd like to know who the emergency management advisor was. It doesn't list that. I didn't read his name or her name in the report today, but they've stated in here that this would have been the most comprehensive set of arrangements that they'd come across, very practical and very useful, and they had no recommendations to make. But we'd like to commend you and your team, being the city's administration team, for the great work that you in this space, you really are shining light. Thank you always being available to take other local government calls and emails. We often talk about Wanneroo being the best practice local government when it comes to emergency management, and that is a credit to the great work you do. And obviously that's to the CEO and his team, and I do want to commend him for that. I would like to know who that management person is. It's not listed in there, so it should be put in there. But apart from that, Mayor, that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Baker, do you want to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. To endorse Councillor Miles' remarks, yes, the RAP, the big RAP, spelled differently to our Friday document, given by the advisor, certainly is one of the best RAPs I've ever seen for a document. This is a massive, detailed, microscopically detailed 179-page report, which in effect covers every reasonable, foreseeable, hypothetical, factual scenario that can arise in the future, as and by way of an emergency. In particular, I note that it even deals with the issue of earthquakes in the city, within the city's boundaries. I'm not aware as to whether the city of Wanneroo, as it is presently constituted, or the former city prior to the split, or the former Shire of Wanneroo, or the former Wanneroo Road Board, ever experienced an earthquake, either directly or indirectly. I've not heard of any cases involving tremors. I'm not sure if Councillor Civic could assist in that regard. He's more of an encyclopedia on the history of the city than I am. But I see in any event, nonetheless, that's covered. And I assume, therefore, depending on where the earthquakes emanate from, any resultant tsunami, if any, would also be incorporated under that earthquake issue. There's a couple of other highlights of the report which I think need to be brought to perhaps the attention of the members of the public. In particular, one thing that I found interesting in the report is that for the first time since the 2021 census, the additional information has been released by the the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and in particular, it refers to on page, it's not a numbered page, I apologise, Annexure 1 dealing with community demographics. it lists the suburbs population statistics with various age groupings for each suburb in Wanneroo. And it indicates that, particularly in terms of the young age bracket between obviously 0 or just born all the way through to 18, that the numbers are quite incredible in terms of the future population growth potential just on the basis of those numbers alone as those age cohorts move through the age demographic period. In particular, I noted with interest that the leading suburb or district, means the same thing, suburb district, with the most number of children aged between 0 and 4 is the suburb of Lansdale, with 1,324 children aged between, obviously more than 0 and 4. And when you consider the other suburbs stats under that same age demographic, they don't get close to Lansdale. So something's going very well in Lansdale at the moment. Congratulations to the Lansdale residents, particularly the young couples and not so young couples, and thank you very much for their ongoing contributions to the future rate-paying base of the city of Wanneroo. Yes, I won't go further than that. The other point I'd like to highlight too is that the stats have also been teased out. I assume these stats are just stats that the city itself has obtained rather than has obtained via the Bureau of Statistics. But it's interesting to note that in terms of primary schools, we have 57 primary schools in the city of Wanneroo. We have 16 secondary schools, although in my view I think the figure should be 17 because whilst St James is listed as being a primary school, it's also a secondary school, and you'll note with its sister school, Peter Moyes, it's listed as being a primary school and a secondary school. So there are 16 secondary schools, and in addition there are 62 childcare centres within the city. And if you look through the names of the operators or the service providers, clearly most of them are not for profits at all. They're private entities, so to speak, and some are obviously parts of, some actually belong to, if you like, franchise chains, so to speak, in the community. So a very thorough report for various reasons, because obviously it seeks to achieve the purpose for which it was prepared, but also because of the statistics and the contents, which indicate that we have to be very, very meticulous with our emergency plans, particularly given the huge tidal wave in our population that will be setting upon us in the next, let me just have a look, 2.5 years, I think, is when the stats should go to the roof and revert back to the 0 to 4 age bracket. So great report, fantastic, very detailed.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, for reading the report to us. Do I have any speakers against the report?
I'm a very good translator.
Do I have any speakers against the report? If I don't have any speakers against the report, voting is now open. Councillors, please cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously. We now move to transactional finance, CSO 10323, financial activities statement for the period ended 31st of January. Could I please have a mover and seconder for this item, please? Move Deputy Mayor Treby, seconded Councillor Herridge. Deputy Mayor Treby, would you like to speak to this item?
To reserve my right.
Councillor Herridge.
No, I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this item? If I have no speakers against this item, I ask councillors to cast their vote, please. Councillor Sangali? And that was passed unanimously. I move on to item CSO 20323, consideration of minutes and decisions of the electors' annual general meeting held on the 7th of February. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Parker, thank you. Do I have a seconder for this item? Councillor Baker. Okay. Is there an amendment? Yes. Councillor Wright, do you have a seconder for this amendment?
Yes. Councillor Rowe.
Councillor Rowe, you a seconder for this amendment? Okay. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mayor. My amendment, which was circulated to all councillors prior to the council meeting, was in regards to decision 7, which was about the metrics. I believe I've changed the words notes to supports, as the recommendation implies that the city not only acknowledges the importance of sustainable energy use and greenhouse gas emission metrics, but actively endorses them. and also includes them in the annual report and the city's website in a visual format. I don't believe that part of that was included in this amendment, which was circulated last night. So I believe this hasn't been updated to what it should be.
So what you're saying is we haven't got the amendment that you submitted to council?
So I sent an email last night. It should be after the city's website. It should say in a visual/dashboard format. That was circulated last night to Ms Smart.
Could we please update that amendment on the screen, please?
So the
Second is happy with that?
So the reason for expanding that was to obviously make it easier for residents to read this both on the city's website and also in the annual report. As I know currently in its format, it is within big chunks of paragraphs and it's very hard for residents to read. In a visual/dashboard format. And this goes along the lines of what the City of Perth and City of Canning are doing, which makes it a lot easier for residents to read, but also access this information and track it over time to see how their ratepayer funds are being used and how we are reinvesting that into tackling emissions, but also tracking our city's progress towards our environmental strategies and policies. So I believe that this amendment goes a little bit beyond also what the electors are wanting, but also retains the intentions of what they wanted in terms of the metrics and an expansion rather than what are we doing currently. So I commend this to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Roy, would you like to speak to this item?
Briefly, thank you, Mayor. Just to articulate my support for the amendment and then to speak a little bit more broadly on some of the other motions that were moved at the annual general meeting of electors. I think the essence of what is in this...
Councillor Rowe, at this point in time, it's only the amendment that you can speak to, and then when we get to the substantive, you can speak to the other items in the annual report.
Will I be able to speak to those items given that I can't move or second them?
Yes, because they're already moved and second. Oh, no, you won't be able to. No. Sorry.
I'll just speak to this one then. Okay. I think it is important that the metrics are included in an accessible way. So it is important that it is on our website and in our annual report. Data does have to be accessible. So the idea of it appearing in a visual format means that more people will be able to access it, understand it, and see how the city is tracking alongside our targets. And I respect that administration is already doing a level of work in this space. I would stress from the motion that was moved on the night by the electors that having ambitious targets is a good thing. It is one of the things that I believe residents are most proud of living in a city that is progressive, ahead of the curve, and definitely acting in a sustainable manner. So having the data available online is a good thing. It leads to a higher level of accountability and a greater level of understanding about what the city's doing on an annual basis. So that's where I'll leave my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Are there any speakers against this amendment? Deputy Mayor Treby.
Not in essence against the amendment, just in terms of the intent of the wording and whether or not there's better wording that could have been used to achieve a more effective outcome. Because the use of the word metrics can be very broad and broadly interpreted. Would the mover and seconder consider inserting the words key performance indicators against national or international benchmarks?
Councillor Wright?
Yes, I'm happy for that as well.
Councillor Rowe? Can we update the amendment to include... Can you repeat that, please?
So the expansion of metrics to include key performance indicators against both national and international benchmarks.
Okay, I'm just going to read the amendment out. Decision 7 supports the expansion of metrics. I think it's take one of the expansions out. So decision 7 supports the expansion of metrics to include key performance indicators against both national and international benchmarks for the city's sustainable energy use and greenhouse gas emissions as detailed in this report, to be included both in the annual report and the city's website in a visual/dashboard format. Is everyone happy with that?
Just a question, Madam Mayor, if I can.
Yes, Councillor Baker.
Yes, just in reference to the terminology national and international benchmarks, who sets those benchmarks? What's the name of the legal entity that sets each of those different benchmarks? And what are those benchmarks? Because I'd like to know that before I vote in support of them being referenced in terms of KPIs.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Treby, do you have any
Mayor,
idea?
there is a plethora of national and international benchmarks on a range of climate-related and other sustainable energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. It's too difficult to nominate them here. The intent, of course, and this is about the intent, is to actually have something meaningful to target for as a benchmark for either the industry or our society, rather than a metrics that might be less meaningful.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Councillor Baker?
Yes, just in terms of the plethora of these entities, are all the benchmarks of the plethora of all the entities exactly the same? Or are they different?
Councillor Baker, Deputy Mayor Treby?
I'm of the school that I'm not a climate denier. I'm very much of the view that the science is out there. It's well adopted at every level of government. It wouldn't be very difficult at all. I think most people throughout administration will well and truly be aware of it. So I find it surprising that that councillors may not be aware of some of those benchmarks themselves. You know, Paris Accord, those sorts of things. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Any other questions on this item? Anyone wants to speak against this item? If there are no speakers against this amendment, councillors, please cast your vote. No one missing. Okay, and that the amendment alternative has been passed unanimously. So we now go to substantive. Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to the substantive, please?
Just very briefly, I would like to thank the electors that took the time to share their concerns and considerations and assure them that their concerns and insights are appreciated and taken on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Baker, would you like to speak to this item?
To support the recommendation as amended, yes, certainly. In particular in relation to decision number 2, decision number 2 of the annual general meeting of electors was that, and I quote, that attendance by elected members to conferences be presented to Ordinary Council in a report, followed by a report advising as to what was gained by attending. Now, of course, that's the specific term that was used in the actual decision, the word conferences, not training, seminars, etc. And notwithstanding that, of course, paragraph or recommendation B2 goes beyond that and says, yes, we will prepare a report regarding attendance at conferences, etc., but also at speaking engagements and I assume education engagements or educational training. So paragraph or recommendation, paragraph 3B2 goes, in terms of decision 2, goes well beyond what was requested by the annual general meeting of electors and includes different additional categories. So yes, I think that's a great idea. And of course, I know that many of us have been pushing for this for some time, but we're nearly there. So yes, a very good report, and I support the recommendation as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Do I have any speakers against this item? If I have no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. That was passed unanimously. We move to item CE 0103-223, and I will move this, and Deputy Mayor Treby will be seconding this item. This is the motion that we will be putting up to ALGA about the facilities, sporting facilities, infrastructure with Infrastructure Australia. All of the regional councils had been putting together to do regional sports infrastructure through Infrastructure Australia, and we were a long way down doing this, and all of a sudden Infrastructure Australia have changed their mind. So this motion is for ALGA to support the regional funding through Infrastructure Australia of major infrastructure sporting facilities that we need to provide in regional areas. The change of decision was at the last minute when we were at the final stage of our business case for approval, and we will present this motion on notice to ALGA to try and get some further support to lobby Infrastructure Australia to maintain their position that was only a few months ago. They've only changed it recently. Deputy Mayor Treby, would you like to speak to this item?
Very happy to support this item and indeed your comments, Madam Mayor. It's important to note, I think, for context, is that the city and indeed the outer growth local governments have put a considerable amount of effort and work into complying with the Infrastructure Australia submission requirements. There are a number of gateways that applicants need to go through, and the city, along with a number of other local governments, were very diligent in meeting those obligations. Also importantly to note that Infrastructure Australia brings out an infrastructure audit on a 3-yearly basis. And the last one that I was aware of, it's the Infrastructure Australia Audit 2019, for the first time understood and recognised the livability and well-being of the Australian society and community as a key investment in infrastructure, and for the very first time introduced the concepts of green and blue sporting and recreation infrastructure. Green being those that we would normally see in either public open spaces, active sporting fields and the like, but also blue infrastructure which would recognise waterways and the use and infrastructure attached to waterways. It was a far-reaching, pervasive approach that changed the landscape of infrastructure development. And now a very short 3 and so years since that point in time, given the city's following diligently the direction of Infrastructure Australia, consistent with the introduction of that, the sporting infrastructure being recognised nationally, have been told that it's now no longer relevant. That is indeed frustrating. And I think it's something that we should be taking a very strong position on, because you set national policy standards and guidelines to be followed, and the city has done more than enough to meet its obligations. And it is indeed very sad and frustrating that that at this stage the submission won't go forward. I think it's absolutely important that a very strong position be put to ALGA at their National General Assembly, and we seek the support of local governments across Australia, because this is an issue that is not unique to the City of Wanneroo or this state. It's something that we should be advocating for as strongly as we can, and there is no better forum for us to be putting a very convincing case than the ALGA National General Assembly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Do you have a question, Councillor Smith? Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you. Last week, the administration representative mentioned at the end that the remit of the organisation had changed, which is, I think, part of the reason why they didn't look at the report. I would want to know if anyone knows more about how the remit has changed for the organisation and if that will impact their consideration of reconsidering the report. Thank you.
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the current federal government did a review of the role and purpose of Infrastructure Australia, and as a result of that review, the advice from Infrastructure Australia was they will no longer consider the growth area Perth and Peel business case. So we would be asking through ALGA for the federal government to review the purpose of Infrastructure Australia and bring the ability back for Infrastructure Australia to consider submissions from local government related to green social infrastructure.
Yes, Councillor Smith.
Does Council or City know if there's many other local governments in the same position that are also calling for a review?
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly subject to Council considering the resolution tonight, my intention is to provide that to the other local government members of the growth area Perth and Peel, as well as to communicate that to WALGA, because WALGA will normally provide some advice to ALGA as part of the development of the ALGA AGM. I will also communicate it to the National Growth Area Alliance, which will provide a more national view and provide the opportunity for other local governments within Australia who share the same view as the City of Wanneroo to maybe pass other or similar recommendations to feed into the ALGA AGM.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this? Do you have a question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up, Mayor, to Councillor Smith. With that being said, from the CEO, and obviously understanding it would have been a reclassification of the priorities of Infrastructure Australia, has the administration or you yourself, Mayor, contacted our local member for peers to ask her to maybe address it with the respective minister before, in this meantime, because I understand what was said last week by the appropriate manager, and I think in all honesty we should obviously engage with her, with the member for peers, to ask her to maybe support the application going forward in her direction, as well as doing the ALGA one.
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the City certainly has made several representations to the member for peers. In addition to that, other local government members of the growth area Perth and Peel have made representations to their federal member as well.
Mr. Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you. Just a lead-on question from Councillor Miles' question. As the report states, the City did write to its relevant of respective federal parliamentarian, the member for Pearce, and as has just been confirmed, representations have been made. What has been the response to the letter that was written to the federal member and the response to the representations, plural, that were made? And also, it makes reference in the report at page 256, second paragraph, that the City has written to or the councils have written to the respective federal parliamentarians. Did that include senators as well, government senators, or just the House of Reps members? Because obviously the state senators represent the interests of the relevant state. In this state, of course, West Australia, the senators are State's House. So any responses yet, please? Thanks. And if so, what do they say?
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. We certainly, I can recall a response from the member of Pearce's office that referred us to the Federal Department of Infrastructure Minister's office, Minister King, that we followed that referral. I'll take the rest on notice and provide elected members copies of responses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Are there any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously. We go to item CEO2 323, the Annual Compliance Audit Report 2022, moved by Councillor Treby. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Civic. Councillor Treby, would you like to speak to this?
Very, very briefly, I think the report itself, it has been through audit and risk, and it did note one, I think, area of concern that relates to the annual return processes from the responsible officers within the city. Noting, of course, that it's absolutely important that as the governing board, we all comply with the timeliness of our annual returns as well. That notwithstanding, I think the report is quite concise and complete, and no hesitation in supporting it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Councillor Civic, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councillor Treby has spoken appropriately with regards to this item, and happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Civic. Do I have any speakers against this item? If I have no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously. We go to item CEO 30323, review and extension of review dates for council policies. Do I have a mover for this? Deputy Mayor Treby, seconder Councillor Miles. Good. Deputy Mayor Treby, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's straightforward.
Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
No, I agree. It is a straightforward report.
Thank you. Does anyone want to speak against this item?
Question, please, Madam Mayor.
Well, Councillor Wright had his hand up first. So, Councillor Wright, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Mayor. It was just on page 270, and I note that I did have a look at the briefing notes that we received, which I believe is confidential. I'm not too sure. Why was the verge treatments removed from the agenda and put into this? I believe this wasn't requested by councillors, and this was done through administration, and no information was provided to us as to why this was removed.
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. It was removed by administration because the amount of questions that were asked at the briefing session and the policy direction that elected members were considering that policy provided warranted it to be referred back to council to further understand what council's intent of scope for that policy was and how that relates to other local laws and competing policies so we can be better informed for the review.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is addressed to Mr Sims, the CEO. Just regarding, Dan, if I can, just a question regarding paragraph 2H of the recommendation. There's reference to the legal representation and costs indemnification policy. Once again, it's proposed to shift the review date of that policy to 30 March 2024. When was that policy scheduled to be reviewed, please, in the ordinary course of things?
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. From memory, I think the first time it was scheduled to review was in May 2016. But council asked for some additional work to be undertaken. It was then presented in November 2021, but referred back by an amendment from council for additional work. Right. And again, at the briefing last week, additional review was requested through questions by elected members, and it's scheduled for a further review and extension of policy to allow that review. As CEO, I understand from elected members' questions at the briefing session that council wishes to explore a variety of further amendments that haven't been considered previously, and that will require a workshop with the elected member and then sufficient time for the administration to consider those amendments and provide feedback back to council.
Just a supplementary.
Thank you,
please.
Mr CEO. Councillor Baker, another question.
Part of that review process, would that include referring the policy to a forum of elected members?
I think that's what the CEO said when they would have further discussion with council members. Yes. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
To speak against?
Yes, Councillor Rowe.
I'll be speaking against. I respect what administration said, but I don't agree with the decision to postpone the discussion of the legal representation and costs indemnification. It was discussed at great length and has been pushed back in terms of its review on 2 occasions. So I believe on principle I'll be voting against this item.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Councillor Wright.
Would it be perhaps wise to maybe add a third recommendation and to adopt the legal representation indemnification policy as per the briefing session notes from last week, rather than bringing it back again?
Mr CEO.
For you, Mayor, I'm not sure from a governance perspective how that could be achieved. We've had a fairly extensive drafted amendment that I would have thought council would wish admin to assist in preparing and reviewing, which by default would be a review.
Councillor Baker?
I think Dan's already asked my question. The point is you can't conduct a review on the basis of notes, and the briefing session is not a decision-making body. So it should follow the usual process for review, I would have thought, as with any policy review. Thanks.
Councillor Baker, it's not a statement time, it's a question time. The CEO made the decision to withdraw it because council members were asking a lot of questions. They wanted further clarification. They weren't happy with how the policy was written, and so he made the decision, we made the decision to bring it back for a forum to get it correct. So that is what we will be voting on in this item. Mr CEO, do you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mayor. There is a difference between reports that are presented to admin to council with its strong and informed recommendations from administration and policy. Policy is the work of council. The development of policy is the work of council, and the adoption of policy is the decision of council. This council's procedure in developing policies, as Mayor Aitken, you alluded to in your previous answer, is through structured council forums.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Are there any speakers against this item? Councillor Parker?
Just a question. When this does come back, is it possible to have it perhaps come back when we do have a new lawyer on board?
Mr CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the intention of the extension date is to provide sufficient time for administration to have the new executive manager, governance and legal be involved in the workshop through a council forum and the final drafting and presentation to council.
Do I have any? Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, my last question on this item. Just referring on page 268, the responsible officer for this report is the Executive Manager of Governance and Legal, and I believe he's been absent for the past few council meetings and hasn't been able to provide answers to council members. Is there a particular explanation as to why this hasn't occurred and why council is paying resources and not being able to utilise the information?
Councillor Wright, that's not an appropriate question about a staff member at the City of Wanneroo. That is not something to be brought up here. Thank you. Mr CEO would like to respond to that as well.
Thank you, Mayor, and I understand the comments you've just made. In addition, I'm not aware of any question that council has asked in this chamber that has not been adequately answered by a member of the executive team, including myself.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Are there any questions against? Any questions for or any speakers against this item, please? On that note, please, councillors, cast your vote. Thank you. Oh, yes. Deputy Mayor Treby has right to reply because we had speaker against. Go, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I agree with the questions that have been raised, with in particular with recommendation to H. I agree with the sentiment. I could only encourage that all elected members make themselves available at council forums where we can ask all of the questions we need to ask in an open and safe manner.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Treby. Could you please cast your vote, councillors? And I declare that carried 10 with 4 against, and Councillor Sangalli, Councillor Civic, Councillor Rowe and Councillor Herridge voted against. So we have no motions on notice, which is item 9. Item 10, we have no urgent business, but we do have confidential reports. Can I have a mover and seconder to go behind closed doors for our confidential reports? Deputy Mayor Treby and Councillor Smith. And can we vote? at 7:59. The resolution for CRO 20323 that Council resolves to undertake the Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation that A, within the next 6 months, the local law is amended to ensure compliance with Section 62(1) of the Bushfires Act 1954 by making all required amendments, which could include attaching the procedures to the local law. B, all consequential amendments arising from undertaking 1 will be made. C, the local law will not be enforced in a manner contrary to undertaking 1. D, where the local law is made publicly available by the city, whether in hard copy or electronic form, ensure that it is accompanied by a copy of the undertaking, and 2, authorises the Mayor to provide a letter of undertaking to the Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation in respect of matters prescribed in Resolutions 1A to D. That was passed with 13 councillors supporting and 1 against, which was Councillor Sangalli. And item CRO 30323 that Council approves by absolute majority to write off rate step as detailed in the report. That was passed 12-2 with Councillor Wright and Councillor Nguyen against. Item 12, the date of the next meeting. The next briefing session has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday, 11th of April 2023, to be held at Council Chambers, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. And item 13, I declare the meeting closed at 8 p.m. Thank you, councillors.